Hi, everyone. So, today we're going to talk about the clash of civilizations concept and the way in which it draws on a particular concept of culture and other definitions of culture that anthropologists, including me, would argue are much more useful in thinking about how the world works. So, I want you to think, first of all, what you think is meant by the term clash of civilizations. What ideas it conjures up for you. And then, second, I want you to spend a moment thinking about what does culture mean to you? And I want you to write each of these down. So, what do you think is meant by the idea of a clash of civilizations? And when I say the word culture, so Joan Scott gives us a couple places in her text, in The Politics of the Veil, in which she describes French people using this term clash of civilizations. So on page 74, there's a statement from some proponents of banning the veil. One of them says it's Islam that has undertaken a crusade against the West, not the reverse. Okay, and so I want you to think for a minute about who the groups are in that statement, right? And I think that once we kind of parse out what are those groups, we can see the way in which they're framed as clashing or just diametrically opposed to each other. Another place is page 79. So I want you to take a moment and look at that. And then finally, on page 182, in her conclusion at the very end of the book, she talks about how um, she sees her whole book basically as an attempt to try to refute the idea of clash of civilizations. And she argues that the debates about whether or not to ban the veil in France really rest on a clash of civilizations idea of the world, right? So, what she says in her very last paragraph in the book on page 182, she says, in this way, the case of the French headscarf law is not just a local story. It allows us to think more broadly about the terms in which democratic polities, meaning democratic governments or democratic societies, including our own, are organized, and to analyze critically the ways in which the idea of a clash of civilizations undermines the very democracy it is meant to promote. So I want you to think for a moment about what she means by that, given that you've already read the book. What does she mean by saying that the idea of a clash of civilizations undermines democracy? How can an idea undermine democracy? And why is she arguing that this particular idea is undermining democracy? So these French people didn't come up with the term clash of civilizations. It comes from the political economist Samuel Huntington, who wrote in the early 90s, and he made this statement. So this was pretty soon after the fall of the Berlin Wall in the early 90s. This was a time when political scientists and other political analysts and people in general were trying to figure out, so what's going on after the Cold War? If the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 symbolized the end of the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the US, and what some people called a bipolar world, people are trying to figure out, so what does it mean that the Cold War is over? And here Huntington comes in and he says, I think that there will be these clashes along the lines of culture. So I want you to think about here, what does he mean about the term culture, or by the term culture? Okay, so think about that for a moment. And then I want you to stop and look online and just Google Clash of Civilizations and see what comes up so you can get a sense of what has. So these are the cultures or tribes that Huntington argued would be clashing in the post Cold War world. If you take a look at this list, see which of these you think makes sense to you based on what you see in the news or what you hear people talking about. Others may make less sense to you, but look closely at this map for a while. You may have to magnify it to see which places in the world Huntington argued were fundamentally different and unique sets of of cultures that would then be at odds with other cultures in the world. So now take a moment again and think about how you think Huntington is defining the term culture. So I asked you to think about that just a moment ago. Um, what do you think when you think culture? How do you think Huntington is defining this term? So if we try to visualize Huntington's definition of culture, we come up with something like this, what's sometimes called the pool ball or billiard ball definition of culture. And this definition is often very common, right? So if you think about the way in which culture is imagined to operate, you see this real separation between different cultures. You can think of it as a noun or an adjective. An adjective would be cultural, and a noun would be like an actual society, would be called a culture. But you can think about in this definition the way in which we see this stark separation and difference between each cultural group in Huntington's depiction of the world. And in fact, if you extrapolate or you kind of expand this idea, although Huntington himself did not say, this is how I think culture operates. He kind of assumed, right? And a lot of people assume when they use the word culture that everyone is sharing the same definition. But this particular bounded definition of culture does assume that everyone within a group, whether it's Sinic, Russian, Muslim, Western, that everyone has the same patterns of behavior, that they share the same values and beliefs, that they agree with each other about major things, and that there's this kind of diametrical opposition between one group. And in fact, often this diametrical opposition is reduced to two, right? Not seven, as in the previous slide, or nine, as in Huntington's original formulation. The West versus Islam, right? In several uh, political candidates, presidential candidates' recent pronouncements, as well as really commonly, if you look in the news or if you listen to people talk, it's very common to hear people talk about the world's people as if they're divided into two groups. And each group shares patterns of behavior, beliefs and values, opinions about major things, and these values and behaviors represent the exact opposite of other groups' values and behaviors, opinions and beliefs, and ideas about what's right and wrong.